My wife lost her wedding ring. And then I found a man's cufflink and the smell of men's cologne in her car. I hired a private investigator, and when I saw the photos, I nearly fainted. Then I got the best lawyer in town, and the court ruled in my favor. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds like golden honey, casting dancing shadows across the breakfast table where Marcus sat with his coffee growing cold. 32 years old, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. He watched his wife Sarah move around their modest kitchen with the grace of a woman who had once believed in fairy tales. Sarah was beautiful in that quiet, understated way that grows more precious with time. Her auburn hair caught the light as she bent to load the dishwasher, and Marcus felt that familiar flutter in his chest, the same one he'd felt when he first saw her at the community college library 7 years ago. She had been reading a book about art history, her finger tracing the reproductions of Renaissance paintings with such reverence that Marcus had known, even then, that she possessed a soul that hungered for beauty. "I can't find it anywhere," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of distress that made Marcus look up from his newspaper. She was standing at the sink, her left hand extended, fingers spread wide. The pale band of skin where her wedding ring usually rested looked naked and somehow wrong, like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Marcus set down his coffee cup with careful deliberation. "When did you last remember having it?" Sarah's green eyes the color of spring leaves after rain, clouded with worry. "Yesterday morning, I think. I remember washing my hands at the office sink and sliding it back on." She touched the bare spot on her finger with her thumb, a gesture that would become heartbreakingly familiar to Marcus in the days to come. "But when I got home last night, it was gone." The wedding ring had been his grandmother's, a simple band of white gold with tiny diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. It wasn't expensive by modern standards, but it carried the weight of 3 generations of love stories. Marcus's grandmother had worn it for 53 years, until the day she died. And his grandfather had pressed it into Marcus's palm with trembling hands, saying, "When you find the right girl, son, you'll know." "Don't worry," Marcus said, rising to wrap his arms around his wife from behind. Sarah leaned into his embrace, and he could smell her shampoo, something floral and clean that reminded him of the garden she tended with such devotion behind their small house. "We'll find it. Maybe it rolled under something at your work." Sarah worked as a receptionist at Belmont and Associates, a small accounting firm downtown. It wasn't the career she had dreamed of. She had studied art and literature, had once painted watercolors that made Marcus's heart ache with their beauty. But it paid the bills while Marcus built his carpentry business. They had plans, dreams that they whispered to each other in the darkness of their bedroom. A house with a studio where Sarah could paint. Children who would learn to appreciate beauty the way their mother did. A future as bright and warm as the morning sun streaming through their kitchen window. "I'll call them when they open," Sarah said. But there was something in her voice that Marcus couldn't quite identify. A hesitation, perhaps, or a note of anxiety that seemed disproportionate to a lost piece of jewelry. Marcus kissed the top of her head and tried to ignore the small voice in the back of his mind that whispered something was not quite right. Sarah was forgetful sometimes. She had the artist's temperament, her mind often drifting to distant shores while her body remained anchored in the mundane world of bills and schedules and household chores. It was one of the things he loved about her, this dreamy quality that made her seem perpetually surprised by the practical demands of daily life. But as the days passed and the ring remained missing, Marcus began to notice other small changes in his wife. She, who had once greeted him with enthusiastic kisses when he returned from work, now offered him her cheek, distracted and distant. She, who had once chattered about her day over dinner, now picked at her food in silence, her eyes unfocused, as if she were seeing something he couldn't. "Any luck with the ring?" he would ask. And she would shake her head, touching that bare spot on her finger with increasing frequency. "I've looked everywhere," she would say. And Marcus would nod and change the subject, not wanting to add to her obvious distress. It was on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the ring had gone missing, that Marcus first noticed the smell. He had been working late, finishing a custom bookshelf for a client, and arrived home to find Sarah already in bed. As he hung up his jacket in the hallway closet, his nose caught something unusual. A scent that was decidedly masculine, with notes of cedar and spice that definitely did not belong to any cologne he owned. Marcus stood in the dim hallway, his heart beginning to beat with uncomfortable speed. The smell was faint but unmistakable, clinging to Sarah's coat like an accusation. He told himself he was imagining things, that perhaps she had been standing near a male colleague at work, or that the scent had somehow transferred from public transportation or an elevator. But when he climbed into bed beside his sleeping wife, the smell was there too, subtle but present on her skin, woven into her hair like invisible fingers that had been touching what was his. Marcus lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to Sarah's breathing. She slept peacefully, her face serene in the moonlight, filtering through their bedroom curtains. She looked like the woman he had married. But something indefinable had changed. It was as if someone had taken a beloved painting and altered it in ways so subtle that the eye couldn't quite identify what was different, only that something vital had been lost. The next morning, Sarah announced that she would be working late again. It was becoming a pattern, these extended hours at Belmont and Associates, though when Marcus had casually mentioned it to Tom Belmont at the hardware store, Tom had looked genuinely confused. "Late nights, Sarah? That's odd. We're not particularly busy right now. In fact, I've been sending people home early most days." Marcus had laughed it off, made some joke about women and their mysterious ways. But Tom's words had planted a seed of doubt that grew with surprising speed. He began to pay closer attention to the small details of their life together. The way Sarah's phone was always face down now, the way she hummed songs he didn't recognize, the way she seemed to glow with an energy that had nothing to do with him. It was during this period of heightened awareness that Marcus made another discovery. Sarah had asked him to move her car one morning, something about a street cleaning schedule. And when he opened the driver's side door, something metallic caught the early morning light. A cufflink. A man's cufflink, nestled in the space between the seat and the center console like a small, silver accusation. Marcus picked it up with trembling fingers. It was expensive looking, with intricate engravings that spoke of taste and money. It was definitely not his. Marcus was a jeans and flannel shirt kind of man, someone whose idea of dressing up involved a clean polo shirt and his best pair of work boots. As he held the cufflink up to the light, the masculine cologne smell hit him again, stronger this time, as if whoever owned this piece of jewelry had been a frequent passenger in his wife's car. The scent seemed to fill the small space, overwhelming and intimate, carrying with it the weight of betrayal and secrets. Marcus stood in his driveway, holding another man's cufflink, and felt the world shift beneath his feet like sand giving way to an incoming tide. The morning was beautiful, the kind of perfect spring day that he and Sarah would have once spent in their garden, planning where to plant the new rose bush they had been talking about buying. But the beauty felt hollow now, like a stage set waiting for a tragedy to unfold. He pocketed the cufflink and went inside, where Sarah was humming in the shower, humming a song he had never heard her sing before. The sound that would have once filled him with contentment now felt like fingernails on a chalkboard, each note a reminder that the woman he loved was becoming a stranger. That evening, when Sarah announced another late night at the office, Marcus simply nodded and kissed her goodbye. But as her car pulled out of their driveway, he found himself standing at the window, watching her taillights disappear into the gathering darkness, and wondering if he had ever really known his wife at all. The cufflink sat heavy in his pocket, a small piece of metal that seemed to weigh more than all their years of marriage combined. Marcus touched it through the fabric of his jeans and made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Because sometimes, love means having the courage to look directly at what you most fear to see. The private investigator's office sat above a used bookstore on Maple Street, reached by climbing a narrow staircase that creaked with each step like the spine of an old book opening. Marcus had found the listing online after 3 sleepless nights of staring at the ceiling, the cufflink burning a hole in his nightstand drawer like a radioactive secret. Detective Ray Kowalski was not what Marcus had expected. Instead of the grizzled, cigarette-smoking stereotype from television shows, Ray was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that looked more suited to gardening than surveillance. His office was neat and understated, filled with filing cabinets and a desk that spoke of methodical professionalism rather than dramatic confrontations. "Tell me why you're here, Marcus," Ray said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a machine that looked older than both of them combined. "And please, take your time. The most important thing is that you're sure you want to know whatever we might find." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation in his mind a dozen times, but sitting across from Ray, the words felt clumsy and inadequate. He pulled the cufflink from his pocket and placed it on the desk between them, where it caught the afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows. "My wife lost her wedding ring 2 weeks ago," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "At first, I didn't think much of it. Sarah's always been a little scattered, you know? The artistic type. But then I started noticing other things." Ray leaned forward, his attention focused but not judgmental. It was clear he had heard variations of this story many times before. Yet he listened to Marcus as if it were the first time anyone had ever spoken of love and betrayal and the terrible space between them. Marcus told him about the cologne, about the late nights at work that didn't seem to match with what Sarah's boss had said, about the way his wife had begun to seem like a beautiful stranger sharing his bed. He spoke about the small changes, how Sarah no longer laughed at his jokes the way she used to, how she had begun buying new clothes without mentioning it, how she had started going to a different gym across town when the one they had belonged to together was perfectly fine. "It's like watching someone you love disappear piece by piece," Marcus said, and was surprised to hear how broken his voice sounded. "I keep hoping I'm wrong, that there's some innocent explanation for everything. But the cufflink..." Ray picked up the small piece of jewelry and examined it under his desk lamp. The engravings were clearer in the bright light. They formed an elegant monogram that looked expensive and personalized. "This is good work," Ray said quietly. "Custom made, probably. If your wife is involved with someone, this might help us identify who." He looked up at Marcus with those kind eyes. "But before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Once we start down this path, we can't go back. If your wife is having an affair, you're going to know about it. If she's not, you're going to know that too. But you'll also know that you suspected her enough to have her followed. Either way, your marriage is going to change." Marcus thought about Sarah, humming unknown songs in the shower, about the empty space where her wedding ring used to be, about the way she no longer reached for him in the morning twilight between sleeping and waking. Their marriage had already changed. He was just trying to understand how and why. "I need to know," he said. Ray nodded and opened a desk drawer, pulling out a contract and a camera that looked sophisticated enough to photograph the surface of the moon. "I'll need some information about your wife's routine, her workplace, her usual haunts. And Marcus, I'm sorry you're going through this. Whatever we find, remember that you deserve honesty in your marriage. You deserve better than wondering." The surveillance began on a Monday morning. Ray would follow Sarah from their house to her office, document her movements throughout the day, and report back to Marcus each evening with updates that felt like small knives to the heart. "She arrived at Belmont and Associates at 8:15, Ray would report, stayed until 11:30, then left and drove to the Riverside Shopping Center. "She spent an hour at Nordstrom's, came out with several bags, then lunch at that new French place on 5th Street. What Ray didn't mention, but what Marcus read between the lines, was that Sarah was spending money they didn't have on clothes she wasn't bringing home, eating at restaurants that cost more than their weekly grocery budget, and somehow filling hours of time that she was supposedly spending at work. On Wednesday, Ray's voice carried a different tone when he called. "Marcus, I think you should come to the office tomorrow morning. I have some photographs to show you." The walk up those creaking stairs felt like a journey to the end of the world. Marcus's hands were shaking as he knocked on Ray's door, and when the detective opened it, his expression was gentle but grave. "Sit down," Ray said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult. Are you ready?" Marcus nodded, though he felt anything but ready. Ray opened a manila folder and pulled out a series of photographs, laying them on the desk with the careful precision of someone who had done this too many times before. The first photograph showed Sarah's car parked outside the Harbor View Hotel, a place known more for its discretion than its luxury. The second showed Sarah herself, walking across the hotel parking lot with a confidence Marcus hadn't seen in her for months. She was wearing a dress he didn't recognize. Something red and flowing that made her look like a woman in a movie, sophisticated and mysterious. But it was the third photograph that made Marcus's world tilt on its axis. Sarah was not alone. The man walking beside her was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that spoke of money and power. He was older than Marcus, probably in his mid-40s, with the sort of polished appearance that came from expensive tailors and regular visits to high-end barbershops. His hand rested on the small of Sarah's back with casual possessiveness, and she was looking up at him with an expression Marcus had never seen on her face before. A look of complete adoration, mixed with something that could only be described as hunger. "His name is Vincent Ashford," Ray said quietly. "He owns Ashford Developments, the company that's been buying up properties downtown for that new mixed-use complex. He's married, has been for 23 years. His wife is Eleanor Ashford. You might have seen her name in the society pages." Marcus stared at the photograph until his eyes burned. The man, Vincent, was everything Marcus was not. Where Marcus was solid and straightforward, Vincent was elegant and refined. Where Marcus worked with his hands, Vincent clearly worked with his mind and his charm. Where Marcus shopped at discount stores and drove a 10-year-old pickup truck, Vincent wore clothes that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, and drove a silver BMW that gleamed like liquid mercury in the hotel parking lot. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Based on what I've observed this week, I'd say it's been going on for at least 2 months, probably longer. They have a routine. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the Harbor View, sometimes lunch at expensive restaurants across town. She's using a credit card I'm guessing you don't know about. Ray pulled out more photographs, each one another nail in the coffin of Marcus's marriage. Sarah laughing at something Vincent had said. Sarah accepting a small wrapped box that almost certainly contained jewelry. Sarah kissing Vincent goodbye in the shadows of the hotel's side entrance, her arms wrapped around his neck like she never wanted to let him go. The last photograph was somehow the worst, though it showed nothing explicitly intimate. It was taken through the window of Vincent's BMW, showing Sarah in the passenger seat, her head thrown back in laughter, her hand resting on Vincent's arm. She looked happy. Radiantly, completely happy in a way that Marcus realized she hadn't looked with him in months. "I'm sorry," Ray said, and Marcus could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "I know this isn't what you wanted to see." Marcus picked up the photograph of Sarah laughing and studied her face. This was his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, the woman who had once painted watercolors so beautiful they made him believe in magic. But she was also a stranger, someone capable of deception so complete that Marcus wondered if he had ever known her at all. "There's more," Ray said gently. "About Vincent Ashford. He has a reputation for this sort of thing. My sources tell me he's had several affairs over the years, always with younger women, always ending the same way. He gets bored and moves on, usually leaving behind some significant financial damage when his wives discover what's been happening. Financial damage. Credit cards, expensive gifts, sometimes even loans or investments that don't work out the way the women expect. He's charming and generous at first, but he's also careless about cleaning up his messes." Marcus thought about their credit card statements, which Sarah had insisted on handling for the past few months. He thought about the new clothes and the expensive lunches and the general sense that money had been flowing out of their accounts faster than usual. "What do you recommend I do?" he asked. Ray leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus's face. "That depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want to try to save your marriage? Confront Sarah and Vincent? Or are you thinking about divorce?" Marcus looked again at the photograph of Sarah laughing in Vincent's car. The happiness on her face was undeniable, but so was the betrayal. She had chosen this man, chosen this deception, chosen to build a secret life that excluded Marcus completely. "I need to think," Marcus said. "Take your time." "But Marcus, whatever you decide, document everything. Keep copies of these photographs, get copies of your financial records, and if you're thinking about divorce, you'll want to talk to a lawyer sooner rather than later." Marcus left Ray's office with the photographs in a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods where he and Sarah had once walked hand in hand, dreaming about their future together. Their house looked the same from the outside. The garden Sarah tended was still blooming with spring flowers. The front porch still held the swing where they had spent countless evenings talking about their dreams. But Marcus knew that when he walked through that front door, he would be entering a different house, one where 7 years of marriage had been revealed as an elaborate fiction. Sarah was in the kitchen when he arrived, humming that unfamiliar song while she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked beautiful and domestic, like the perfect wife in a magazine advertisement for happiness. "How was your day?" she asked, turning to kiss his cheek with lips that Marcus now knew had been kissing another man just hours before. "Fine," Marcus said, and marveled at how normal his voice sounded. "How was yours?" "Oh, the usual. Busy day at the office." Marcus nodded and went upstairs to change clothes, carrying the manila envelope like a secret that burned his fingers. In their bedroom, where Sarah came home each night and slept beside him as if nothing had changed. He hid the photographs in his dresser drawer, beneath work shirts that smelled like sawdust and honest labor. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside him, Marcus stared at the ceiling and made his decision. She had chosen Vincent Ashford and expensive hotels and a secret life built on lies. Now Marcus would choose his own path, one that led toward justice and truth and the kind of ending that men like Vincent Ashford never expected. He was going to fight back, and he was going to win. The law office of Catherine Mitchell occupied the top floor of the tallest building in downtown, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the city spread out below like a chessboard. Marcus had never been in a place so intimidating. All polished marble and leather-bound books, and the kind of quiet that spoke of serious money and serious power. Catherine Mitchell herself was not what Marcus had expected from the city's most feared divorce attorney. She was petite, probably in her late 40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things. Her reputation preceded her. She was known as the woman who had taken down 3 different city councilmen in their divorce proceedings, who had secured record-breaking settlements for wronged wives, and who approached each case with the methodical precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending a firm handshake as her secretary showed Marcus into her office. "I understand you have a situation that requires immediate attention." Marcus had called that morning, still reeling from his meeting with Ray Kowalski and the photographs that had shattered his understanding of his marriage. Catherine's secretary had somehow found room in her schedule for an emergency consultation, though Marcus suspected it had more to do with the dramatic nature of his situation than any particular kindness. "My wife is having an affair," Marcus said, the words feeling strange and bitter in his mouth, "with a married man named Vincent Ashford." Catherine's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Vincent Ashford of Ashford Developments?" "Yes. Do you know him?" A small smile played at the corners of Catherine's mouth, and Marcus got the distinct impression that this was a woman who enjoyed a good fight, especially when she held the winning cards. "Mr. Ashford and I have crossed paths before," she said diplomatically. "His wife Eleanor came to see me about 2 years ago, though she ultimately decided not to proceed with divorce proceedings. Something about wanting to preserve their family's reputation and their children's inheritance." Catherine moved to her desk and opened a leather portfolio, her movements precise and purposeful. "Tell me everything, Mr. Thompson. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details, no matter how small they might seem." Marcus told her about the missing wedding ring, about the cologne and the cufflink, about Sarah's increasingly frequent late nights and mysterious errands. He told her about hiring Ray Kowalski and about the photographs that had confirmed his worst fears. As he spoke, Catherine took notes in neat handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated just how thoroughly she understood the complexities of marital dissolution. "Do you have copies of the surveillance photographs with you?" she asked. Marcus pulled out the manila envelope and spread the images across Catherine's mahogany desk. She studied each one with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen similar evidence countless times before. But Marcus caught her eyebrows raise slightly when she saw the photograph of Vincent helping Sarah out of his BMW. "Interesting," she murmured. "Mr. Ashford appears to be less discreet than usual. This is quite good evidence of adultery, which will be helpful in divorce proceedings. But tell me, Mr. Thompson, what exactly do you want to achieve here?" It was a question Marcus had been asking himself since leaving Ray's office. Part of him still loved Sarah, the Sarah he thought he had married anyway. And part of him wanted to find some way to save their marriage. But the larger part, the part that grew stronger each time he looked at those photographs, wanted justice. "I want her to face consequences for what she's done," Marcus said. "I want Vincent Ashford to face consequences too. And I want to make sure that I'm protected financially and legally." Catherine leaned back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers beneath her chin. "Those are all achievable goals. But we'll need to be strategic about how we proceed. First, let's talk about the divorce itself. Missouri is a no-fault divorce state, which means we don't technically need to prove adultery to dissolve the marriage. However, adultery can still be relevant when it comes to property division and spousal support, especially if marital funds were used to support the affair. She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what looked like a battle plan. "You mentioned that your wife has been spending money on clothes and expensive meals. Do you have access to credit card statements and bank records?" Marcus nodded. "Sarah handles most of our finances, but I can get access to the statements. I've noticed our credit card balances have been higher lately, but I assumed it was just normal expenses. We'll need to document every penny she spent on this affair," Catherine said. "Hotels, restaurants, gifts, clothing, everything. If she's been using marital assets to fund her relationship with Mr. Ashford, we can argue for a larger share of the marital property to compensate you for that financial misconduct." She made more notes, her pen moving rapidly across the legal pad. "Now, about Mr. Ashford. What exactly did you have in mind regarding consequences for him?" Marcus had been thinking about this question for days. Vincent Ashford was wealthy and powerful, the kind of man who was used to taking what he wanted without facing any real consequences. He had pursued Marcus's wife with the casual arrogance of someone who believed that money and charm could buy anything, including other people's happiness. "I want his wife to know what he's doing," Marcus said. "I want his business associates to know. I want everyone who thinks Vincent Ashford is such a respectable pillar of the community to see what kind of man he really is." Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. "That can be arranged. Eleanor Ashford is from one of the old banking families in the city, very concerned with reputation and social standing. If she were to receive certain information about her husband's activities, she might be motivated to take action that would make his life quite complicated." She pulled out another file from her desk drawer and flipped through it quickly. "Mr. Ashford's business dealings are also somewhat questionable. He's been using city connections to secure favorable zoning decisions for his development projects. If certain photographs were to surface showing him in compromising situations, it might raise questions about the nature of his relationship with city officials who have been helpful to his business interests." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Vincent Ashford had stolen his wife and disrupted his life. Now he would face some disruption of his own. "There's one more thing to consider," Catherine continued. "We could pursue what's called an alienation of affection lawsuit against Mr. Ashford. It's an old law, but it's still valid in Missouri. Essentially, it allows a spouse to sue the third party who interfered with their marriage." "You mean I could sue Vincent Ashford for breaking up my marriage?" "Exactly. And given Mr. Ashford's financial resources and the strength of our evidence, we might be looking at a substantial monetary judgment. It would also be a matter of public record, which means the media would likely cover the story." The thought of Vincent Ashford's name splashed across newspaper headlines, of his carefully cultivated reputation crumbling under the weight of public scandal, filled Marcus with a grim sense of justice. The man who had treated Marcus's marriage like a game would discover that some games had serious consequences. Catherine spent the next hour outlining their strategy. They would gather financial records and document every expense related to Sarah's affair. They would prepare divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences, but preserve the right to introduce evidence of adultery if it became relevant for property division. They would compile a comprehensive file on Vincent Ashford's business dealings and personal conduct. And when everything was in place, they would strike with the precision of a military operation. "This isn't going to be cheap," Catherine warned. "My retainer is $25,000, and a case like this could easily cost twice that before we're finished. But if we're successful with the alienation of affection lawsuit, Mr. Ashford could end up paying your legal fees as part of the judgment." Marcus thought about his savings account, about the money he had been setting aside for the house with the studio where Sarah could paint. That dream was dead now. But the money could serve a different purpose. It could buy justice for the man who had stolen his wife and satisfaction for the woman who had betrayed his trust. "Let's do it," Marcus said. Catherine extended her hand across the desk. "Welcome to the fight of your life, Mr. Thompson. And don't worry. By the time we're finished, Mr. Ashford is going to wish he had never heard your wife's name." That evening, Marcus returned home to find Sarah in their garden, tending to the roses they had planted together during their second year of marriage. She was wearing gardening gloves and humming that unfamiliar song. And for a moment, watching her work among the flowers they had chosen together, Marcus felt a stab of loss so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. This was the woman he had fallen in love with. The woman who could make beautiful things grow, who painted watercolors that captured light like trapped prayers, who had once looked at him the way she now looked at Vincent Ashford. Somewhere along the way, he had lost her. Or perhaps she had never been his to begin with. "The roses are looking beautiful," he said, walking over to where she knelt among the flower beds. Sarah looked up and smiled, but Marcus could see through it now, could see the distance in her eyes, the way her attention seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "I was thinking we should add some lavender over by the fence," she said. "It would smell wonderful in the evenings." Marcus nodded, though he knew they would never plant lavender together. By the time the seasons changed, this garden would belong to only one of them, and these roses would bloom for whoever remained in the house where their marriage had lived and died. "That sounds nice," he said, and went inside to begin gathering the financial records that would help Catherine Mitchell destroy the man who had stolen his wife. The war was about to begin, and Marcus intended to win it. Over the following week, Marcus threw himself into the preparation for legal battle with the same methodical dedication he brought to his carpentry work. He spent evenings poring over credit card statements and bank records, documenting every suspicious expense, every unexplained charge that might be connected to Sarah's affair with Vincent Ashford. What he found was worse than he had expected. In the past 3 months alone, Sarah had charged more than $8,000 to credit cards Marcus barely knew existed. There were charges for expensive lingerie at boutiques he had never heard of, meals at restaurants where Marcus had never eaten, hotel charges that made his stomach turn with their implications. The most damaging evidence came from a credit card statement that showed a charge for $500 at Meridian Jewelers, the same upscale jewelry store where Marcus had once window shopped for Sarah's birthday present, but ultimately decided was too expensive for their budget. When Marcus called the store and spoke to the manager, pretending to be confused about a charge on his wife's account, the woman was happy to provide details. "Oh yes, Mrs. Thompson," she said cheerfully. "She bought a lovely men's cufflink set, very expensive piece, custom engraved. She said it was an anniversary gift for her husband. Such a thoughtful wife." Marcus hung up the phone with hands that shook with rage. Sarah had used their money, money he had earned with honest work, money they had saved for their future together, to buy gifts for her lover. The cufflink he had found in her car was something she had purchased for Vincent Ashford, paid for with funds from their joint account. The betrayal felt complete now, not just emotional but financial as well. Sarah hadn't just given her heart to another man. She had given him Marcus's money too. Catherine Mitchell was grimly satisfied when Marcus presented his findings during their next meeting. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, spreading the credit card statements across her desk, like evidence in a murder trial. "Financial misconduct in support of an extramarital affair gives us significant leverage in property division. We can argue that she's essentially stolen from the marital estate to support her relationship with Mr. Ashford." She made notes on her legal pad, her handwriting sharp and precise. "The jewelry purchase is particularly damaging. She used marital funds to buy expensive gifts for her paramour. That's going to play very badly in court if we need to go to trial." "What about Vincent Ashford?" Marcus asked. "Have you made contact with his wife?" Catherine's smile was predatory. "Eleanor Ashford and I had lunch yesterday at the country club. I simply mentioned, in passing, that I had some information she might find interesting regarding her husband's business activities. She's agreed to meet with me again next week for a more private discussion." The web was closing around Vincent Ashford, and Marcus felt a savage satisfaction at the thought of the man's comfortable world beginning to crumble. Vincent had pursued Sarah with the casual cruelty of someone who believed other people's lives were his to disrupt at will. Now he would learn that actions had consequences, even for wealthy, powerful men who thought themselves above such mundane concerns as other people's pain. "There's one more element to consider," Catherine said, pulling out yet another file. "I've been doing some research into Mr. Ashford's business dealings, and there are some interesting patterns emerging. Several of his development projects have received unusually favorable treatment from the City Planning Commission, often overriding local opposition and environmental concerns." She showed Marcus a series of documents that meant little to him, but clearly held significance for someone with Catherine's legal expertise. If it were to become public that Mr. Ashford has been conducting an extramarital affair, it might raise questions about whether his personal relationships have influenced his professional success. City officials who have been helpful to his projects might find themselves under scrutiny they'd prefer to avoid. The implications were clear. Vincent Ashford's affair with Sarah wasn't just a personal matter. It was a potential political scandal that could damage careers and destroy reputations throughout the city's power structure. When the story broke, and Catherine seemed confident that it would, the fallout would extend far beyond one man's marriage. "How long before everything is ready?" Marcus asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We want to make sure all our documentation is perfect before we move. Mr. Ashford will have excellent legal representation, and we can't afford any procedural mistakes that might give him an advantage." Marcus nodded and gathered up the papers Catherine had showed him. Outside the office windows, the city spread out below them like a map of territories to be conquered. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably meeting Vincent for another afternoon at the Harbor View Hotel, both of them blissfully unaware that their secret world was about to be exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. "One more thing, Mr. Thompson," Catherine said as Marcus prepared to leave. "When this story breaks, and it will break in a very public way, your wife is going to be devastated. Mr. Ashford will likely abandon her the moment things become complicated. Are you prepared for that? For the possibility that she might come to you seeking forgiveness and reconciliation?" Marcus thought about the question as he rode the elevator down to street level. Once, The idea of Sarah returning to him, repentant and ready to rebuild their marriage, would have filled him with hope. But too much had happened. Too many lies had been told. Too much money had been stolen and spent on another man's pleasure. The Sarah who might come crawling back would not be the woman he had married. She would be someone who had chosen betrayal over honesty, passion over commitment, excitement over the quiet, steady love that Marcus had offered her every day for 7 years. No, Marcus thought as he walked out into the afternoon sunshine. When the reckoning came, there would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no happy reconciliation where love conquered all. There would only be justice, served cold and complete, and the satisfaction of knowing that Vincent Ashford would pay a very high price for the pleasure of stealing another man's wife. The war was almost ready to begin, and Marcus Thompson, quiet carpenter with calloused hands and an honest heart, was about to teach some very powerful people that ordinary men could fight back and win. 2 months later, the headlines dominated the local newspapers for weeks. Prominent developer named in adultery lawsuit. Ashford wife files for divorce, seeks half of business empire. City planning officials under investigation for corrupt dealings with Ashford Developments. Marcus sat in his kitchen now, since Sarah had moved out in shame and defeat, reading the morning paper with his coffee and feeling something that might have been peace. The court had awarded him the house, the majority of their joint assets, and a judgment of $200,000 from Vincent Ashford for alienation of affection. Sarah had indeed come to him, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. When Vincent abandoned her the moment the scandal broke. But Marcus had looked at her with the clear eyes of a man who had learned to see through beautiful lies. And he had quietly closed the door on 7 years of marriage and a lifetime of dreams that had been built on false foundations. Vincent Ashford lost everything: his wife, his business, his reputation, and his freedom, when the criminal investigation into his corrupt business practices resulted in federal charges. Eleanor Ashford, with Catherine Mitchell's expert legal guidance, had emerged from her divorce as one of the wealthiest women in the city. Marcus used his settlement money to buy a small cabin in the mountains, where he could work with his hands and sleep peacefully at night, knowing that justice had been served and truth had prevailed over deception. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would think about Sarah and the woman she might have been if she had chosen differently. But those thoughts no longer brought pain, only a quiet sadness for dreams that had never been quite real, and a marriage that had been beautiful on the surface, but rotten at its core. The roses in his garden bloomed more magnificently than ever that spring, as if they had been waiting all along for the lies to be cleared away, so that honest beauty could finally flourish in the clean air of truth. And Marcus Thompson, who had once been a fool for love, discovered that being a wise man was a far more comfortable way to live. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, when the mountain air carried the crisp promise of winter and the leaves on Marcus's property had turned the color of burnished copper. He found it slipped under his cabin door when he returned from his morning walk. A cream-colored envelope with his name written in handwriting he recognized despite himself. Sarah's script had always been elegant, the product of those art classes she had taken in college, each letter formed with the deliberate care of someone who believed that even mundane communication could be beautiful. Now, holding the envelope in his work-roughened hands, Marcus felt an unexpected flutter of something that wasn't quite nostalgia, but wasn't indifference either. He set the letter on his kitchen table and made coffee, taking his time with the ritual of grinding beans and measuring water, as if the careful attention to these small tasks could somehow prepare him for whatever words Sarah had chosen to send into his carefully constructed solitude. The cabin was exactly what Marcus had dreamed of during those long years of marriage, when such dreams seemed impossibly distant. Built from local timber with his own hands over the past 6 months, it sat on 12 acres of wooded hillside 40 miles outside the city. Every beam and board had been chosen and placed with the methodical precision he brought to all his work, creating a space that was entirely his own. No compromises, no consideration for anyone else's taste or comfort. The main room served as both living space and workshop, with tall windows that captured the morning light and a stone fireplace that filled the space with warmth on cold evenings. His tools hung in neat rows along one wall, each in its designated place, ready for the custom furniture commissions that kept him busy and provided more than enough income for his simple needs. It was a good life, Marcus reflected as he poured his coffee. Quiet and honest and free from the complications that came with loving someone who could lie as easily as breathing. He had friends among the local craftsmen and farmers, men who appreciated his skill with wood and his willingness to help with difficult projects. He attended the small community church on Sundays, where Reverend Matthews delivered sermons about redemption and forgiveness that Marcus listened to with polite attention, but no personal application. Some wounds healed, others simply stopped bleeding. With his coffee steaming beside him, Marcus finally opened Sarah's letter. Her handwriting was unchanged, but the confidence that had once characterized her correspondence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost desperate. Dear Marcus, I know I have no right to write to you after everything that happened. I know the lawyers said we shouldn't have any contact, and I know you probably throw these letters away without reading them. But I have to try, because I can't live with what I've done to us, to you, to everything we built together. I've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Rachel Morrison, on Elm Street. She says I need to take responsibility for my choices, not make excuses or try to blame my actions on anything except my own selfishness. She's right. What I did was unforgivable, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Vincent was never real, Marcus. He was a fantasy, an escape from the fear that my life was too small, too ordinary. I convinced myself that what we had wasn't enough, that I needed something more exciting, more passionate, more... I don't even know what I thought I needed. But you were real. Our marriage was real. The garden we planted together, the quiet mornings in our kitchen, the way you used to listen to me talk about books and paintings even when I knew you didn't really understand why they mattered to me. All of that was real and good and more valuable than anything Vincent ever offered. I threw it all away for expensive dinners and hotel rooms and the thrill of feeling desired by someone who saw me as nothing more than a temporary distraction. And now Vincent is in prison, and his wife has everything. And I have nothing except the knowledge that I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking you to contact me. I'm not asking for another chance. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and that I would give anything, to undo what I did to us. I hope you're happy, Marcus. I hope you found peace. You deserve so much more than what I gave you. Sarah Marcus read the letter 3 times, his coffee growing cold as he studied each carefully formed word. There was pain in Sarah's handwriting, a vulnerability that reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with in that college library so many years ago. But there was also something performative about it, as if she had practiced these sentences, refined them until they struck just the right note of contrition and regret. He folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. Not because he wanted to keep it, but because throwing it away felt like the kind of dramatic gesture that would give it more importance than it deserved. Sarah's pain was her own to carry now, just as his healing had been his own work to accomplish. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later, and the third a week after that. Each one followed a similar pattern. Expressions of remorse, descriptions of therapy sessions, careful acknowledgments of responsibility mixed with subtle appeals for some kind of response. Marcus read them all with the detached interest of someone examining artifacts from a previous civilization, then filed them away in the desk drawer that was becoming a repository for a past he had no intention of revisiting. It was Catherine Mitchell who finally called to warn him that Sarah's campaign might escalate beyond letters. "She's been asking around about you," Catherine said during a brief phone conversation on a Friday afternoon. "My sources tell me she's hired a private investigator to find out where you're living now." Marcus set down the chisel he had been using to carve details into a cherrywood headboard and walked to his cabin's front window. The forest stretched out before him, a tapestry of autumn colors that shifted and danced in the afternoon breeze. Somewhere out there, hidden among the trees or parked along the winding mountain road, might be someone with a camera, documenting his new life for a woman who had forfeited any right to know about it. "Is that legal?" he asked. "Unfortunately, yes. As long as they don't trespass on your property or harass you directly, hiring someone to locate you and observe your activities isn't against the law. But Marcus, I want you to be very careful here. Sarah is exhibiting some concerning patterns of behavior." Catherine's voice carried the weight of professional experience with the darker aspects of human nature. "In my practice, I've seen this before. When someone loses everything due to their own actions, they sometimes become fixated on the person they blame for their downfall. Sarah may have accepted responsibility in her letters, but that doesn't mean she's not also harboring resentment toward you for fighting back instead of simply accepting her betrayal. What do you recommend? Document everything. Keep copies of her letters, make notes of any attempts at contact, and if you see anyone suspicious around your property, call the local sheriff immediately. I'm also going to file a motion for a restraining order, just as a precautionary measure." After hanging up, Marcus found himself looking at his peaceful mountain sanctuary with new eyes. The isolation that had felt like freedom now carried undertones of vulnerability. His nearest neighbor was almost a mile away through dense forest, and the winding dirt road that led to his cabin would provide plenty of opportunities for someone to watch his comings and goings without being noticed. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Marcus installed motion sensor lights around his property and double-checked the locks on his cabin doors. It felt like a violation of the peace he had worked so hard to build, this need to defend himself against the woman who had once shared his bed and his dreams. The fourth letter arrived the following Monday, but this one was different. Gone was the careful contrition of the previous correspondence, replaced by something that made Marcus's skin crawl with its desperate intensity. "Marcus, I know you're reading these letters, even if you won't respond. I know you still care about me, even if you're too hurt and angry to admit it. What we had was too real, too deep, to just disappear because of one mistake." Yes, I said one mistake. Because that's what it was, Marcus. One terrible error in judgment that I've paid for every day since. But does one mistake really erase 7 years of love? Does it really justify you disappearing completely, cutting me out of your life like I never mattered at all? I've been watching the news about Vincent's trial. They're saying he might get 15 years in federal prison. 15 years, Marcus. Don't you think that's enough punishment for both of us? Don't you think we've both suffered enough for what happened? I know where you're living now. I know about the cabin in the mountains, about your new life that doesn't include me. But I also know you, Marcus Thompson. I know you're not really happy living alone like some hermit, pretending you don't need human connection. You're hiding. That's what you're doing. You're hiding from the possibility that we could still have something beautiful together. I'm going to come see you soon. Not to cause trouble or make demands, just to talk. Just to look you in the eye and remind you of what we used to be to each other. Because I refuse to believe that love like ours can just die because of one mistake, no matter how terrible. You can't hide from me forever, Marcus. And deep down, I don't think you really want to. Sarah. The letter shook in Marcus's hands as he read it. Not from emotion, but from a kind of cold fury that he hadn't felt since those first dark days after discovering her betrayal. The presumption in her words, the casual dismissal of her months-long affair as one mistake, the entitled assumption that she had any right to invade the peace he had built. All of it struck him as the product of a mind that had learned nothing from the destruction she had caused. Marcus immediately called Catherine Mitchell. "She's escalating," Catherine said after he read her the letter over the phone. "And the fact that she's admitted to locating your residence is actually helpful from a legal standpoint. I'll have that restraining order filed by tomorrow morning." "What if she shows up before then?" "Don't let her onto your property. Don't engage in conversation. If she refuses to leave when asked, call 911 immediately. And Marcus, if you have any firearms, now might be a good time to make sure they're accessible." Marcus did indeed have firearms. A hunting rifle and a shotgun that he used for protection against the occasional black bear or aggressive wild boar that wandered onto his property. The thought that he might need them for protection against his ex-wife filled him with a sick dread that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the sheer wrongness of it all. That night, Marcus barely slept. Every sound in the forest, every owl call, every rustle of wind through the trees, every distant crack of a branch, made him wonder if Sarah was out there somewhere. Watching his cabin, planning her approach, convincing herself that she still had some claim on his life. When morning came without incident, Marcus allowed himself to hope that perhaps Catherine's legal maneuvering would be enough to keep Sarah at bay. The restraining order would be served by the end of the day, legally prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of his person or property. Violating it would result in immediate arrest, which surely even Sarah's deteriorating judgment would recognize as an unacceptable risk. Marcus spent the day working on a dining room set for a client in town, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of measuring and cutting and sanding. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, and by late afternoon, he had almost convinced himself that the crisis had passed. He was wrong. Sarah's car, the same Honda Accord where he had once found Vincent Ashford's cufflink, was parked in his driveway. When he returned from delivering the dining room set, she was sitting on his front porch steps like she belonged there, wearing a yellow sundress that he remembered from happier times and an expression of determined cheerfulness that didn't quite hide the desperation in her eyes. "Hello, Marcus," she said, rising gracefully as he climbed out of his truck. "You look good. Mountain life agrees with you." Marcus stayed by his vehicle, keys still in his hand, calculating the distance between himself and the cabin door. Sarah looked thinner than he remembered, with sharp angles where there had once been soft curves, and her auburn hair had been cut shorter in a style that aged her face and emphasized the hollow look around her eyes. "You can't be here, Sarah," he said quietly. "The restraining order was served this afternoon. You're in violation just by being on my property." Sarah's smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself with renewed intensity. "Oh, that silly legal thing? I'm not here to cause trouble, Marcus. I just wanted to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for. 5 minutes to explain what really happened, to help you understand that what we had was too special to throw away over Vincent's manipulation. The way she said Vincent's name with such venom and disgust told Marcus everything he needed to know about how Sarah had rewritten the history of her affair in her own mind. Vincent was now the villain who had seduced and manipulated her, rather than the willing partner in adultery that the surveillance photographs had clearly shown him to be. "I understand perfectly well what happened," Marcus said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "And I'm calling the sheriff now." "Wait." Sarah took a step toward him, and Marcus saw something wild and desperate flash across her face. "You can't just have me arrested like some common criminal. I'm your wife, Marcus. I'm the woman you promised to love for better or worse." "Ex-wife," Marcus corrected, his finger hovering over the emergency contact number. "We're divorced, Sarah. It's over." "No." The word came out as almost a shriek, and Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. "It's not over because I don't accept it. I don't accept that 7 years of marriage can be erased because I made one mistake. I don't accept that you get to disappear into the mountains and start over while I lose everything." She was crying now, great gasping sobs that shook her thin frame. But there was something performative about even her grief, as if she were acting out a scene from a movie about tragic love rather than experiencing genuine emotion. "You ruined my life," she continued, her voice rising to a pitch that sent birds scattering from the nearby trees. "You and that witch lawyer of yours destroyed everything I had. Vincent's in prison, his wife got everything in the divorce, and I'm living in a studio apartment and working at a coffee shop because no decent company will hire me after all the publicity." Marcus felt no satisfaction at learning about Sarah's reduced circumstances. If anything, her obvious suffering made him feel tired and sad, like someone forced to watch the final act of a tragedy that could have been avoided if different choices had been made along the way. "I'm sorry your life has been difficult," he said. And he genuinely meant it. "But those consequences are the result of your choices, not mine. I didn't make you have an affair. I didn't make you spend our money on another man. I didn't make you lie to me for months. You did all of that yourself. But you didn't have to destroy me." Sarah screamed, her face flushed and streaked with tears. "You could have forgiven me. You could have worked with me to save our marriage. Instead, you turned it into some kind of revenge fantasy where you got to be the noble victim and I got to be the evil adulteress." Marcus looked at this woman, who had once been the center of his world, who had once painted watercolors that made him believe in beauty, who had once hummed while she tended their garden with such loving care. Somewhere inside this hysterical, desperate creature was the Sarah he had married. But that woman seemed as distant and unreachable as a character in a half-remembered dream. "I need you to leave now," he said quietly, pressing the number for 911. "If you go immediately, I won't press charges for violating the restraining order. But if you're still here when the deputies arrive, you'll be arrested." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving as she struggled to control her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was very quiet and very cold. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. We belong together. I know you still love me. I can see it in your eyes. And I'm not going to give up on us just because you're too stubborn and hurt to admit what you really feel." She walked to her car with dignity that seemed forced, pausing at the driver's door to look back at him one more time. "This isn't over," she said. "I'll wait as long as it takes for you to come to your senses. And when you do, I'll be here. Because that's what real love means, never giving up, no matter what." Sarah drove away, just as Marcus heard the distant sound of sirens approaching through the mountain roads. He canceled the 911 call and stood in his driveway for a long time, watching the dust settle where her car had been and wondering if the peace he had built here was already irrevocably damaged. That night, Marcus dreamed of the garden they had planted together. But in the dream, all the roses had turned black and the air smelled of decay. He woke before dawn with the certainty that his troubles with Sarah were far from over, and that the woman who had once been his wife was now something else entirely. Something broken and dangerous that would not be satisfied with legal restraining orders or geographical distance. The war he thought he had won was entering a new and more dangerous phase, and this time, Marcus wasn't sure that justice and truth would be enough to protect him from the wreckage of love gone wrong. In the days that followed, Marcus found himself jumping at every sound, checking the locks on his doors multiple times each night, and scanning the tree line around his property for any sign of unwanted surveillance. The peace he had worked so hard to build felt fragile now, threatened by the specter of a woman who refused to accept that some things, once broken, could never be repaired. Catherine Mitchell increased security patrols around his property and advised him to install a security system with cameras. But Marcus knew that no amount of legal protection could truly shield him from someone who had convinced herself that love justified any violation of boundaries or basic human decency. Sarah had shown him her true face during that confrontation on his porch. And it was the face of someone who would never stop, never accept reality, never move on from the fantasy that their marriage could somehow be resurrected from the ashes of her betrayal. The only question now was how far she would go to make that fantasy come true, and what Marcus would have to do to protect himself when she finally crossed the line from desperate to dangerous. The mountain forest that had once felt like salvation now felt like a trap, and Marcus Thompson, who had thought his story was over, realized that the most frightening chapter was just beginning.